Hello and welcome to the SEC Breakdown. This is our new weekly college football show. Every week we're going to break down the SEC games of the week and touch on some top news and topics around the conference. I'm Blake Toppmeyer from the Knoxville News Sentinel. I cover the Tennessee Vols, and we've got three guests joining us today.
I'm Eric Blum from the Columbia Daily Tribune, covering the Mizzou Tigers.
Hale, I cover Auburn for Montgomery Advertiser.
And I'm John Hale with the Louisville Courier Journal, covering Kentucky.
Guys, obviously this year the COVID-19 pandemic has created challenges for everyone in the sports world, and college football is no different. Some players have opted out. There have been active cases. There have been additional players who have been in quarantine for a couple weeks at a time. Just what are some of the major impacts we're seeing on teams as this pandemic affects the season, and how do we see this maybe altering the way the season plays out or affecting teams week to week?
I guess it's just a day by day, maybe even hour by hour situation on each of these campuses. We learned yesterday, and this goes into a little bit of Missouri's Week 1 game, that Missouri's not going to be without 12 players against Alabama. And when you're playing Nick Saban, as you know, you need to kind of be at your best to play the number 2 team in the country, especially with a first-year head coach in Eli Drinkwitz. They're going to be shorthanded. Although the identities of those players aren't known at this time, they're still probably Friday, Sunday, and then Wednesday and the next Friday. Results of those tests, including actually yesterday, which they don't have the results for publicly yet. 5 tests here to go, just to limit the number of players they can have. It's just, you got to just be ready for anything, expect the unexpected. And I think that's not exclusive to Columbia, Missouri, or Auburn, Alabama, Knoxville, Tennessee, or Lexington, Kentucky, but everywhere across college football right now.
Yeah, Eric, as you mentioned, 12 guys out for Missouri, already ruled for Alabama. Not a great situation when you're playing Alabama. Tennessee, the team that I cover on a daily basis, has had more than 40 players unavailable for practice at times during the preseason. The situation's gotten better as it's gotten closer, and a lot of those players have been more quarantine situation than active cases. But I think this isn't a problem that's just going to affect Missouri or Tennessee or any one school. So, Josh, John, do you guys have any sense of maybe what teams might be best prepared to handle a season like this, where the number of available players and on the field is going to change from week to week?
I don't know if there is a way to kind of judge teams off best prepared, because it's almost random. It matters how much depth you have, because you never know how many players you're going to need, but you can't truly prepare for something that's like this, because this is not something that a coach has ever dealt with. You always say, well, we need to have guys ready in case of injury, guys ready for those situations. But what if 4 linebackers get COVID-19, or one gets it and 3 have to quarantine? You never prepare for your 4 top players at a position to get injured at the same time. You always prepare backups or third teamers. So it's going to be the team that has the most and best depth, but I don't think you can do anything other than just prepare to have as many guys ready as possible, because there is no way to prepare for something like this where it could be totally unexpected when you lose multiple guys at a position.
Yeah, to Josh's point, I think it's probably a situation where the rich get richer. The best teams with the best players are probably in the best position here, just because they have more of them. But also, without knowing, what exactly is going on inside these locker rooms, it's hard for us to say. To some extent, the teams that handle the precautions and the limitations best are going to be best provided for this, but that doesn't mean that you still can't get the virus from going to the store, or getting something to eat, or going to class and doing everything that they're telling these players to do every day. So it also depends, within the own locker room. For Kentucky, the team I cover, they haven't had any opt-outs. They have a lot of depth coming back from last year. They're much deeper than you normally think of Kentucky football. And the position they've been affected most by testing is the secondary. That's a position that they have some bodies and they can stand to lose some guys. But if at inside linebacker they lose 1 guy, 2 guys, they're in deep trouble, because they don't have any depth there. So I think even within teams, depending on where exactly these positive cases and contact tracing hit, it's going to be really interesting to see each week to week, who steps off the bus.
And we've already seen this season 3 Big 12 teams go down to Sun Belt Conference teams, and there's been some discussion about whether this might level the playing field a little bit in college football. Might the uncertainty caused by it could, make it more likely for upsets to happen on a given Saturday. What do you guys think about that? I mean, do you think that's a possibility, or is it a sense where the rich could get richer, as John mentioned, throughout this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think to some extent it's the rich get richer, but as Josh pointed out, it depends on what each team looks like each week. I mean, if next week Kentucky shows up at Auburn, has all their players, and Auburn is missing 15 or 20, then you certainly like the chances of the upset coming up there. But if it's a situation where Kentucky's missing 5 or 10, that might hurt them a lot more than an Auburn or an Alabama or an LSU missing a handful of players.
I think you might have to relate it to the teams with first-year head coaches. At the end of the day, Missouri, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and the one from Arkansas off the top of my head, the 4 in the league that don't have that reliability with a new coaching staff and all that coming by. When you can rely on those things from years past, I think that those 4 teams might be at a little bit of a disadvantage. Yes, most teams are transitioning coordinators, but when you look at Missouri has 7 new staff members, and I'm sure there's similar change, from Matt Luke to Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, for instance. I think that things like that kind of just have to, make a difference when you can't rely on years and years under Nick Saban or, Gus Malzahn or anyone like that.
Josh, what do you think? Are you going to see a bunch of upsets this year, or is Alabama and Georgia and Florida going to just steamroll everybody?
I mean, you could see that, but I think it does level the playing field in the fact that every team is dealing with the exact same thing. So this could hit every team. There's no matter how good you are, how talented you are, or how many resources you have, every school is dealing with this in the same way, and no one's immune to it. So could Alabama and Georgia and Florida roll over everybody? It's definitely possible. But like John said, what if Alabama is the best team in the conference, but their quarterback position gets hit by COVID-19, and Matt Jones and can't play, or both of them can't play, and now all of a sudden you're talking about, well, Alabama is still the best team, but they're dealing with something that they could not have possibly prepared for before this year. So it could be the same as usual, and we could see the best teams be the best and the teams below them be where they are, but it could open things up if the worst were to happen to any one of these teams.
One thing I've thought about whether we see teams do is, in baseball, a lot of times guys carry a utility player on the roster that maybe can play 6 different positions. And, we've seen Tennessee throughout the preseason. They have a freshman, D. Beckwith, who has practiced at tight end, wide receiver, and running back. And so, I don't think he's a standout at any of those positions, but if depth is really hit hard for Tennessee at any one of those positions in a particular week, he could probably step in and perform competently. Have you guys in the programs that you cover, have you seen anybody sort of emerge, or do the coaches seem to be tinkering at all with trying to create a few, utility type players that maybe can play 3-4 positions and jump in a pinch?
I think that's certainly been the case at Kentucky at certain positions. I mean, offensive line, you talk about their cross-training guys at guard and tackle and center. In the secondary, they're playing new guys at nickel and corner to try and get as many of their best players on the field as possible. I mean, some of that they do every year anyway, but I do think it's particularly important this season, knowing how much you're going to lose. The problem for a team like the one I cover that doesn't necessarily have a ton of 5-star freshmen coming in is with young guys, they're so focused on getting them to learn one position well right away that I think they lose some of that ability that you might have with one of the top 25 players in the country to learn some of those things immediately that you would at multiple positions.
I think maybe at Missouri, it might be a guy like a Jalen Knox, who was a high school running back and then might play some kick returner this year as well as wide receiver. Maybe a Kiki Chisholm, who was a high school quarterback, he played a little bit there, but he's a transfer from Division II Angelo State. If, Sean Robinson, Connor Bazelak, and Brady Cook all go down, but that's, well into having problems there. And probably the same thing that John said with the offensive line, losing 3 starters there. Defensively, it's a little more sound. And I think that maybe it's easier for a secondary to kind of trade off between safety and corner. You're seeing guys like a Martez Manuel maybe even play both of Jelani Williams. But in terms of the exact lineup, I think that it's more, just fluid than ever. You kind of go and see, even in halftime, hey, you want to play a little receiver instead of playing fullback or tight end running back? Go for it. And we'll see if anyone kind of crosses over offense to defense or anything like that.
Yeah, Auburn does a lot of cross-training every year within positions. So they'll have the bucks and defensive ends play tackle, and they'll have corners play safety, and the safeties play corner and nickel. And they do a lot of that to create competition. I think the thing that's the most interesting is what happens if a position gets so depleted that you have to think like, oh, do we move this safety down to linebacker, or can this outside linebacker be a defensive end because we're out of those? And I think the biggest question probably all of us have going into the season, and every coach has too, is there a point that any team could get to at a position where they've lost many guys where the SEC would say, hey, this game's not going to go forward because we don't think you have enough guys at this position to play a game this weekend. I don't know the answer to that yet, but that's going to be the biggest thing to me is, yeah, you can say we'll move this safety down or move this running back to wide receiver, but what if a team like Auburn has 12 wide receivers, what if 9 of them are down? Is there a point where the SEC says, or the schools say, we don't feel comfortable playing a game this weekend because we don't have enough guys able to dress at that spot on the field?
I think a month or 6 weeks ago, one of the big storylines that I think we were all following was the opt-outs. And I believe a Vanderbilt kicker was maybe the first SEC player to opt out. And of course, since then, we've seen a lot bigger names than a Vanderbilt kicker opt out. Perhaps, really 2 big names jump out, I think, in Jamar Chase from LSU. LSU's probably been hit the hardest by opt-outs. And then, of course, Jamie Newman at Georgia opting changes greatly the quarterback situation there for a team that many expect to be the favorite in the East. But as the season unfolds, guys, do you think we could continue to see more opt-outs? I mean, not just one here, one there, but I guess do you think it could become like a bigger story of a lot of guys deciding maybe at the midpoint of the season if the team's not playing particularly well, it doesn't look like they're playing for an SEC championship, do they just shut it down for a year? Or do you think more guys probably made their decision on the front end, and whoever's in at this point most likely is probably going to stick in with this thing?
I think it could depend on if guys get sick. Because speaking from Auburn, 3 guys that opted out. One was because he has a girlfriend with a child on the way in November, and he wanted to make sure he was healthy and put them first. But 2 opted out after getting COVID-19 and revealing that publicly and saying that they dealt with symptoms that were debilitating. One said he has a pre-existing condition that makes it more dangerous for him, and they opted out after that. So I think maybe you could see guys like Blake said, if their teams aren't playing well, or they just kind of want to punt on the season, say I'll come back next year or whatever. But not having the eligibility count against them, I'm not sure if they would. But I think if a player were to get sick and were to deal with symptoms, that might cause them to think like, is this worth the risk to continue playing this season?
Eric, John, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting in Major League Baseball, we heard that theory too, that in September, like right now, teams that were out of it, players were going to opt out, and we haven't really seen that. Obviously, those guys are getting paid and have a financial aspect, so I wonder if in college that's something that we might see more of, for there's no financial benefit to staying through the whole season. I do think, especially with underclassmen and guys who want to play in the future, there's always that benefit of getting better and getting those reps and getting, improving your future outlook. That helps for them, and that'll keep a lot of those guys around. And then you also have to look at your teammates and see, just gauge what the perception is going to be. If it feels like you're cutting out because you don't think the team's any good anymore, versus if you had a legitimate concern before the season that we've seen so far.
Yeah, and I'll be interested to see, actually, does anyone who opts out then chooses maybe to opt back in? There's no from my estimation, no thing you can just kind of change if you really want to. So if you really wanted just to stay out, yes, most likely you're going to stay out. But is there anybody, like if your team gets good, oh, I want to play now and maybe accept it back in? I'm not sure, just how fluid is that situation going to be? 1 week you're on the roster, 1 week you're not. And so most coaches, I don't think, would like that for most of their players. But is there any way to avoid that if a guy wants to be practiced or not? I'm not sure.
All right, guys, let's start taking a spin through the week 1 games here for the SEC. We'll save our game of the week to discuss at the end. But Eric, let's go to you and start us off with Alabama against Missouri, week 1. Missouri did not get the most favorable schedule draw among SEC teams, but I guess maybe get the toughest one out of the way, out of the chute.
Yeah, you're saying that adding LSU and Alabama is not a good thing, but that's to be expected when you have Arkansas and Mississippi State as your 2 West teams that you're facing. And it goes Missouri. It's kind of a stark difference because you're going from a season opener of Central Arkansas and an SEC opener of Vanderbilt to Alabama being both. And that's just, welcome to the SEC Eli Drinkwitz. He said multiple times, you come here to coach against the best and play against the best. Well, the number 2 team in the country and Nick Saban, I really don't think it gets much more stiff of a test right out of the gate than that. I think Missouri is a 24-point underdog right now. I think that's pretty much right on the nose. There's still a lot of unknowns with this Missouri team. I know there's a lot of unknowns with every team, especially with COVID-19, but we're talking about like tangible things to go off of. And we know Nick Bolton's going to be one of the best linebackers in the conference, if not the country. We know that their safety tandem of Joshua Bledsoe and Tyreek Gillespie is going to be one of the best in the conference. We know they're kind of depleted at the offensive line and tight end. We know that they have Larry Roundtree coming back, an all-conference running back from 2 years ago pretty much the entire offense progressed a little bit in 2019 under Barry Odom, who's now at Arkansas. But just in terms of just gauging where, if there could be a pull and upset from this Missouri team, where it could come from, and we really don't know who a starting quarterback or a lot of the starters are going to be at this point, is tough. But Missouri's not out of the water yet, but it's going to take a whole lot for them to overcome Alabama with how much experience they have coming back.
Georgia at Arkansas. To me, the most interesting part of this is who starts at quarterback for Georgia. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think it's going to be JT Daniels or anything else that you'll be looking for or interested in seeing in Georgia against Arkansas?
Yeah, I think you're certainly looking at the Georgia side of things there just for big picture implications this week. I don't know that the matchup gets you very excited at all. It is a great situation to be in for Georgia that you lose Jamie Newman, arguably the best quarterback in the league, a lot of preseason SEC Player of the Year picks, and then you still have JT Daniels and some other talented options there. What they do at quarterback is going to be interesting. If it is Daniels, if he's ready to go, if he can play and he plays well against Arkansas, then you feel better about their ability to hold off Florida and Tennessee and maybe even Kentucky in the East. How they do early in the season with that position in particular, I think is the number one factor to watch for the Bulldogs.
Florida at Ole Miss. I think Florida maybe should be considered more of the SEC East favorite with Jamie Newman now opting out. Ole Miss, I think, is more intriguing teams in the West just because of the Lane Kiffin factor. And I actually think this is maybe one of the more fun matchups in week 1. Am I on the mark there or off in the weeds?
I'm with you with that. I think it should be fun. I mean, I think Lane Kiffin, seeing him back in the SEC, seeing that debut will be fun. But really, I think same with Georgia. I want to watch Florida and I want to watch quarterback Kyle Trask because I think you're right. I think if there is a year that Florida can overtake Georgia, it's got to be this one, with Georgia really having a lot of questions at quarterback with Jamie Newman opting out. I think a lot of people have picked Kyle Trask to be the SEC for like the first team quarterback in the SEC this year. He was pretty good last year when he came in. This is kind of like that first game. Like, all right, if we're going to be the favorites, if we're going to overshoot the favorites in the East, let's establish it this game. And that's what I'm watching. I want to see if Florida comes out and says we're the favorites. We're going to show it this week.
John, Eric, I mean, a big storyline in the West obviously is the new coaches. We'll move past Arkansas, but I mean, everybody's talking about Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss and Mike Leach at Mississippi State. Of those two guys and what they inherit, which of the two do you think has a chance it's going to be a tough road for either of them in that West. But which of them has a chance, do you think, maybe to make a bigger splash in year one?
I think it's Lane Kiffin. I think it's Ole Miss for sure. I just think there's too much turnover on Mike Leach's roster and too much of a schematic change from what Joe Moorhead was doing to what Mike Leach is going to do. You look at what Washington State in this first year, they were 3-9. I think they had a more talented roster probably in Pullman than right now in Starkville. So, and you look at, there was kind of the signs of brilliance from what happened last year with Matt Luke and Ole Miss and with a young roster. And although the head coach changes, the roster stays a little bit more the same with John Reese Plumlee and guys like that. So I do think that actually Ole Miss might be one of the more underrated teams in the entire conference. Actually, Mississippi State's going to have a little bit more trouble than I think a lot of people are predicting.
I'd agree with that. I mean, I think you got to go with Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin there. It will be interesting with Mike Leach and Mississippi State, just what they do with that offense. I mean, air raid, you don't think about a very potent run game, but obviously, Kylan Hill at Mississippi State might be the best player in the SEC. He's arguably the best running back for sure that's coming back. How does he use him this year? How willing is he to kind of adapt to his personnel versus trying to force his personnel to adapt to his system, especially in this crazy year with no spring practice and the weird off season and prep? I'll be interested to see that factor for sure with them.
Well, John, let's stay with Mississippi State and move on to our next game. Mississippi State at LSU. LSU lost as much as anybody in the SEC off last year's team, and then had some opt-outs on top of it. Any legitimate chance for an upset, do you think, against Mississippi State here in week one?
I mean, I don't think so, except for the X factor we talked about earlier. If LSU shows up and doesn't have 20 or 30 players because of COVID testing, then it's the great equalizer for everybody. I do think in a 10-game SEC schedule, it's going to be so difficult for every program. I mean, there are not easy weeks. But in the weeks, you do get the teams that are projected at the bottom of either division. If you're a legitimate contender, if LSU wants to challenge Alabama or whoever else for the West in the title, you have to take care of business in these games. And if anybody does stumble there, I think that's going to be a really interesting indicator of just what the parity in this league with COVID and everything else is going to be this year. I don't see it happening this week against Mississippi State, but that's maybe something to watch just for the kind of outlook of the season as a whole.
Tennessee finished last season on a 6-game winning streak, opening the year at South Carolina. Team coming off a pretty poor season last season. It's interesting. The early betting lines I've seen in this game have a pretty tight spread. I would have thought it would have been a little bit broader. I feel like this is a game Tennessee should and needs to win. 8 starters back on each side of the ball, including a pretty strong offensive line. Eric, do you see why maybe that some betting lines are tight in this one, or do you feel like this is Vols all the way in Columbia, South Carolina?
Yeah, I think that it should be at least a touchdown for the Vols, even on the road. Maybe that's what it has to do with it, just traveling for the first time and all the complications off the field that might be tougher with COVID, just playing on the road. And, maybe that's why Alabama isn't the 4-touchdown favorite going to Columbia, Missouri, and it's only 24 here. I think that I'm not sure as to why. I think South Carolina might have a little bit of a tougher year under Will Muschamp, and Tennessee is definitely trending in the right direction. You saw at the end of last year how they just, there was an opposite curve, Missouri and Tennessee. Tennessee got hot right at the right time. Missouri lost to Vanderbilt and then lost 5 straight. So I think that Tennessee's pretty much going to pick up right where they left off and have a pretty good week one.
Texas A&M's opener, they get to host Vanderbilt, heavy favorite for the Aggies there. Josh, every year I feel like I overvalue Texas A&M, and I know I'm probably not alone in that category. I don't know if it's just since the arrival of Jimbo Fisher I value them, or for whatever reason, I always feel like Texas A&M's my sleeper in the West this year, and then they sort of finish in the middle of the pack and don't quite live up to my sleeper hype. But once again, I'm picking A&M as my sleeper in the West. I think I maybe picked them to finish second in the West. Am I crazy? And am I thinking just giving too much hope for the Aggies and the Jimbo Fisher factor?
Last year I was with you. Last year I'm like, Texas A&M this is gonna be the year. They're gonna figure it out. I thought they were gonna be at worst the 3rd best team in the SEC last year. I think they finished 4th. I guess I'm not going to buy it anymore until I see it. because I see this and then like they look talented. They have Jimbo. It all looks good on paper, but on the field, it never looks as good. They got Vanderbilt, which is great. Congratulations to them. That's the best week one matchup you can ask for, especially at home. But I don't know. Kellen Mond being the most experienced quarterback in the SEC helps, especially this year. But he just lost his top wide receiver to an opt-out. They'll win week one. I think that's no question there. But I don't know if I see them jumping into the Auburn, Alabama, and LSU tier in the West this year.
All right, that brings us to our game of the week, Kentucky at Auburn. John, let's start with you and then go back to Josh. Kentucky's a team that I think a lot of people have pegged as sort of a sleeper in the East. Does it feel like this is right for maybe an upset opportunity, or what has to happen for Kentucky to win this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think this game is kind of, a great look at Kentucky's season chances as a whole. I mean, there's so much. It's interesting, the perception of this team. On the one hand, you could say they lost their best player. They lost Lynn Bowden, who was essentially their entire offense for the second half last year. There's no Lynn Bowden on this team who can do the things he did. But then you look a little deeper and say they returned basically every important player back at every other position, and they get Terry Wilson back at quarterback, who was their starter last year, went out with a season-ending knee injury. Was a situation where if he's healthy and he's not got a lot of rust to shake off, I think they can upset Auburn in this game. If he struggles, if they have to look at the second or third options, especially with Joey Gatewood, the Auburn transfer's status kind of uncertain with his waiver right now, then it's going to be hard to pick Kentucky in this game or to contend for the East, which is what a lot of Kentucky fans are looking at right now.
This could be a close game. It depends to me on Auburn's offense, because we've heard all offseason about how Gus Malzahn bringing in buddy Chad Morris is going to fix the things that was wrong with Auburn's offense last year. The biggest of those being struggling against basically any good defense to move the ball and score. If Auburn's offense comes out and all the changes they put in this offseason start to click, and Bo Nix takes that sophomore leap at quarterback, I think Auburn should win this game. But if any of that stuff doesn't click, if there's struggles in offense after really having only 6 weeks and 20-something practices to install that stuff, and it starts slow, I think this is going to be a close game. I know Auburn fans are terrified because the game is 11 a.m. Central, and they don't like those because it's the sleepy start and all that stuff. So the fact that there's no home field advantage really for Auburn, it's in Jordan-Hare, but there's going to be at most, I think, 17,500 fans there. So it could be an even game. If Auburn's offense gets going early, I think Auburn should win, because I think Auburn is the more talented team on paper. But if there's any struggles from that offense, we're looking at a close game in week one.
Eric, let's close with the perspective from Columbia, Missouri. Who do you like in this one?
I think Auburn by a little bit. I think that, probably the most talented player from either team last year was Derek Brown at Auburn. Does the defense kind of miss a beat without him? Or do they kind of shut down? Would it be a healthy Terry Wilson taking over for Lynn Bowden? I think maybe Auburn by a touchdown would probably be where I'm at. But I kind of agree with both John and Josh is that, if Auburn does not start fast, can Kentucky capitalize with a lot of depth coming back on both sides? I think that, where Kentucky fans are is you see just the talent that Mark Stoops has brought in year after year after year. And it seems like guys that just fit right into the program and are guys that, at best can be some of the best in the SEC at their position group. So, this is not going to be, I think, that much of a shocking upset if it happens. But just because how much little has to go right for Kentucky kind of spur that. But I think that as of right now, I give a little bit of an edge to Auburn. And if Bo Nix comes out and has a great performance like he did last year in the season opener against Oregon, I think Kentucky just might have to, go for another day and try better another time.
Season's almost upon us. We'll be back next week to offer some takeaways from the week one action and look ahead to week two.